This week's Parsha, Parshat Vayetzei. A nation is born. And immediately in the first pasuk, Vayetzei Yaakov Vayelech. And this becomes a precursor to the future of the Jewish nation. Vayetzei, Vayelech, and then in Devarim we see Vayisu, Vayachnu, the Jewish people, Yotzei Yaakov, the Bnei Yisrael. We are the wandering Jew. Rashi, in the first parsha of the Torah, first pasuk, Parshas, brings down a quote from Yirmiyahu, and based on that quote, Parshas Bishvil Yisrael Shenikra Rashis. The world was created for Israel because Israel is also referred to as Rashis. Israel, not the country itself, but the people. I always wondered about that. I mean, isn't it a little bit chauvinistic? We are the smallest nation in history. And look at the impact that this smallest nation in history has had on world history. So today I'm going to try to give an explanation of how this came about. We start with the Avot and we fast forward to Yaakov. Yaakov had 4 wives. Not going into the issue of the matriarchs, the imot, their status. It's a fact. He had 4 wives, and from these 4 wives he had 12 sons and 1 daughter. From Leah he had Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Uzbulun. That's about 6. And Leah had the daughter, Dinah. He had Rachel, Yosef, and Binyamin. And then he had the other 2 wives, Zilpah, from whom he had Gad and Asher. And then from Rachel, from Bilhah, Dan and Naftali. So you add it all up, 12 tribes and Dinah. By the time the Jews go down, or the children of Yaakov at that point of history, go down to Mitzrayim because of the famine, we're 70. That's how the book of Shemot begins. 70 we went down, and several hundred years later, depending on when you begin to count the period of exile, of slavery, we leave Egypt at 600,000. From the research that I have done and what I have looked at, it appears that Jewish history has, in biblical times and a little bit thereafter, has never been more than 2 million. 800,000 to 2 million are the so-called estimates of how many Jews there were. Okay? Then we have the exile. 10 out of 12 tribes, Shvatim, are exiled. We say we don't know where they are. They've disappeared. Well, a spaceship landed, a huge spaceship, or a few spaceships, and took them off the planet. What happened? They took flights to New York, Miami, Los Angeles. They have to be somewhere nearby. And from my studies over the years, and especially with the collapse of what was called by a former great president of the United States, Ronald Reagan. I don't like to get political, but you have to give a person shvach when he deserves it. when the evil empire that he called the Soviet Union collapsed, and I consider myself at least a fairly well-educated person, I never heard of all of these Asian countries that are near Israel, the state of Israel, Dagestan, Kazakhstan. Well, maybe Kazakhstan, I heard that's where the Russians exiled my parents as slave laborers, but at the same time saved them from the Germans, okay? Dagestan, all of these stans, 10, 12 of them, they all look to be Jewish. The way they act, the village life, the dress, the code of ethics. There are plenty Jews in there. And today with the modern technology and DNA and all these other kinds of testing, I think we should spend time examining who these people really are. And we may be shocked, we may be seriously shocked that there's a lot of Jewish blood there. There's a lot of Jews there. This is where the Asara Shvatim, in my humble opinion, this is the Sambat Yom. This is the area outside the river where a great majority of the Asara Shvatim have intermingled. I'll talk more about Jews intermingling in various cultures in a few moments, but this is the area. I call it the stans. All of these stan countries, this is the area where the Asara Shvatim are. If you look at a map, which you'll see in a moment, it makes sense. It was easy to exile so many people by foot, by boat, and it was nearby. And they mingled into the culture that was there, or they started the culture that was there. These are your tribes. This is the history of the Jews. Now, today's figures say that worldwide we are about 15 million Jews in the world. Well, let's say that's accurate. So there are 2 remaining tribes, so 7.5 million, 7.5 million. So let's say 7.5 million came out of one tribe over all of these centuries. Take 7.5 million, multiply it by 10, you have another 75 million. That's already a serious number. So perhaps there are 15 plus 75 million Jews in the world, and they don't even know they're Jewish. So from Yaakov, from the 4 Imaot, this is what we have. This is how a nation was born, but it's a nation that was always on the move, not of its own volition, but because of the various invasions and exiles, Nebuchadnezzar, the Romans. This is the history of the Jew. This is the wandering Jew. Well, hopefully now we don't need the wandering Jew anymore. There's a land of Israel which is inhabited mostly by Jews. We have a place. It's just we have to be careful. The Chachamim warn us that the past tragedies occurred by B'Noseinu Harabim. It was because of the sins of the Jewish people. Because we are on this world a light, a beacon to the world of Torah, of morality, of justice, of fairness, observance of the mitzvahs of Torah. And when we violate that, we incur the wrath of God. Now, that's just the exile towards that part of Asia, the Stan section of Asia. Let's talk about what happened somewhat in Europe. Years ago, when I used to take walks with my father on the boardwalk in famous Rockaway, we used to have very serious discussions, and I used to ask him questions. One question I would always ask is about Who are we? How do we know who we are before Zayda, before Zayda, before Zayda? And my father said what was probably the appropriate answer at the time. He said to me in Yiddish, "Frag nicht zu viel Kashas." Don't ask too many questions, because ausgefunden you're going to find in some many Shafili Yidden. We're not Jews. We have been so interspersed. We have been so intermarried. We have been so mixed in with the nations. We don't really know who we are. And probably chances are good we're not. So that may have held sway with me then. But as we returned to the land of Israel in 1948, and as all kinds of stories are emerging, we see that it's not that maybe we aren't Jews so much, it's that maybe people who are considered Goyim, Gentiles, Christians, maybe they are Jews. I give you some recent examples from personal life, from as I'm growing through life. Just recently, within the last few years, former Secretary of State of the United States, Madeleine Albright, comes out and says, I have just discovered, and she was in her late 60s, that I am Jewish. My mother is Jewish. We're from Czechoslovakia. My mother was Jewish. That makes me Jewish. That makes my children. My daughter's Jewish. The daughters, whomever they married, in all probability not Jews, in all probability, their children, or if they had children, are Jewish. All right? And they're from Czech, as I think I said, what used to be called Czechoslovakia. In New York's famous cathedral on Fifth Avenue, there is a cardinal who used to be the Cardinal of New York, John O'Connor, who's buried in the crypt of that church on Fifth Avenue. About 2 years ago, his sister came out and said, by the way, my mother was Jewish. So, if you do the calculation, if her mother was Jewish, she's Jewish. And her brother, a cardinal, someone who could have been the head of their church, is a Jew. He's buried in St. Patrick. In Paris, the Archbishop, the Cardinal, Jean-Paul Lustiger, is really Aaron Lustiger, a cardinal. He too could have been the head of a Catholic church. He too came from a family that was Jewish and he hid out. I have distant relatives that were hidden during the war, children. Their parents never returned. What happened to them? Mashiach will figure it out. Only recently, I had a gentleman who worked for us for many years. His name was Mike. I don't want to really give a last name, but it's an obvious and typical Italian name, which he was. Nothing wrong. He was Italian, or so we thought. And one year, the first or second year that he worked with us, I said to him, Mike, I'd like to get you a present for your holiday. Maybe go buy a turkey and give me the bill, or if you want, I'll go shopping with you. Pick out a nice kosher turkey. He said, I don't need it. I said, why? He says, I don't celebrate. I said, why? He said, because I'm Jewish. I said, you're Jewish? You told me you used to be the Shabbos guy in a Jewish neighborhood. You turned the lights on, you turned the lights off for people for the shul. He says, yeah, my last name is Italian. My father was Italian. My mother was Jewish. And then he starts to laugh. And my brother, and he didn't like his brother, he made a nasty comment, my brother is a priest. So whether it's in Asia, or whether it's in Europe, or whether it's in the United States, or whether it's in fancy Paris and Notre Dame, we're there. We're mixed in over there. So if we go to 70 million just from the tribes, what about the people that we lost during the Holocaust, or that hid during the Holocaust, or that came out of the Holocaust to Shoah, denying their Jewishness? So we could have been, we should have been, and perhaps now we will become a populous nation, and it's up to us. Because 15 million at this point is a high number, among the highest in Jewish history, maybe exceeding pre-World War II levels. But, Bavonoseinu harabim, because of our many sins, we could get knocked out again. We could get knocked down again. But I'm not gonna talk about that right now. What I'm talking about right now is the point that we have to learn that numbers are not insignificant, but they don't count as much as they used to before. The Jewish people have been the smallest nation, but yet, if we look at statistics, we've been the most productive. Law, science, medicine, morality, we're at the forefront. Why? Why? Because of our Torah. Our Torah has shown us how to live. Our Torah has given us formulas, has given us commandments. Our Torah has enriched our lives, and it has enriched our brains, our approach to life. So the lesson is this week that numbers are important. 12 is important. 13 is important. 70 is important. But you don't have to have millions of people in order to be a successful people. And our success comes from Torah. That is the secret weapon, so to speak, that the Jewish people have. I once heard a word, a dra Torah, from someone who says, really, why do the nations hate us so much? Are we that bad? I mean, we help out, we discover things, we help things. Why do they hate us? He says they hate us because they're jealous of us. And why are they jealous of us, I asked? They have Mercedes, they have palaces, they have wealth, they have numbers. Because they are jealous of us, because we have the Torah. They don't. They don't. And they don't realize it. And that's the reason that they are jealous. They don't even know why they're anti-Semitic. There are countries where there are no Jews and they hate the Jews. Why? They don't know, but they hate the Jews. Hopefully this will change. And this is the message of Vayetzei. Bishvil Yisrael shenikra rashis. We are few in number, but quantity in this case doesn't count. It's quality. Shabbat Shalom v'Shalom al Yisrael.